inside the shadow prison where inmates are sent and never seen again. Before we begin, don't forget leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. At 3:12 a.m., the sound is small but final. Daniel Ruiz is asleep on the lower bunk, one arm hanging over the edge of a thin mattress that barely softens the steel beneath it. The housing unit is quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way prisons become after midnight count, when exhaustion replaces conversation. The overhead light outside his cell hums faintly. Then metal hits metal. A sharp crack echoes through the tier as a baton strikes the bars. Not violently, not urgently, just enough. Daniel's eyes open immediately. He doesn't sit up yet. In prison, sudden noise at night means only a few things. None of them are good. A second strike lands on the bars. Ruiz, stand up. The officer's voice is calm, controlled. No raised tone, no explanation. At 3:13 a.m., Daniel swings his legs over the side of the bunk. His movements are slow, measured. He has learned not to move too fast. Fast movements make staff nervous. He stands. The cell door remains closed, but the electronic lock clicks. A sound he knows well. The door doesn't open yet. It waits. Face the back wall. Daniel does. His heart rate increases, but his face stays neutral. Inside prison, emotion is currency, and showing too much of it can cost you. At 3:14 a.m., the steel door slides open with a mechanical groan. Two correctional officers stand outside. Not the usual single-night officer. Two. That detail matters. Daniel notices. One officer holds restraints. The other carries a small clipboard. Step out. Daniel steps in the corridor barefoot, the concrete cold against his skin. The rest of the housing unit remains asleep, or pretending to be. No announcement is made. No one asks questions. At 3:15 a.m., metal cuffs close around his wrists. They're not overly tight, not aggressive, just precise. Daniel finally speaks. Where are we going? There is no answer. One officer checks the clipboard. The other gestures forward. They begin walking. Behind them, the cell door closes. It does not slam. It seals. And as Daniel is escorted down the dim corridor under flickering lights, he does not yet understand that this walk, this quiet, controlled, middle-of-the-night movement, is the beginning of something inmates rarely talk about openly. Not because it doesn't exist, but because the ones who enter it often vanish from the yard without explanation. At 3:16 a.m., Daniel turns the corner away from his housing unit. He does not look back, because in prison, when movement happens at night, it is never random, and somewhere, hours earlier, a decision had already been made about him. Daniel just wasn't there when it happened. The review. At 1:07 p.m., Daniel Ruiz is standing in the recreation yard. The sun is high, washing the concrete in harsh light. The yard sounds normal, controlled noise, short conversations, dominoes tapping on metal tables, distant shouts bouncing off fencing. Daniel leans against a railing, speaking quietly with another inmate he has known for months. Nothing dramatic. No raised voices. Just conversation. From a distance, it looks ordinary. But inside the administrative building, less than 200 yards away, something else is happening. A correctional officer types Daniel's name into an internal system. An intelligence note has been submitted earlier that morning. Not a charge. Not a disciplinary report. A note. It mentions possible association, possible alignment, possible tension building between two groups in the unit. Inside modern correctional systems, possible is enough to trigger review. At 1:18 p.m., Daniel laughs at something said beside him in the yard. He wipes sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his uniform. He has no idea his file has just been flagged for administrative screening. Upstairs, a classification specialist scrolls through his record. Sentence length, prior infractions, housing history, known affiliations, confirmed or suspected. No one calls Daniel in for questioning. No one informs him of concern, because this stage does not require his presence. At 1:42 p.m., a risk matrix begins calculating. Points are not dramatic. They are subtle, weighted categories, behavioral indicators. intelligence patterns, institutional stability concerns. Daniel remains in the yard until 2 p.m. count is called. He returns to his cell, eats dinner later that evening, makes a phone call before lockdown. His voice sounds normal, calm. He tells his mother everything is fine. At 4:10 p.m., in a closed office behind reinforced glass, 2 staff members review his file together. The phrase, special handling, appears in the margin. There is no emotional debate. There is no confrontation, just quiet procedural agreement. The decision is not punishment. It is described internally as prevention. By 6:55 p.m., the placement request is digitally approved. Temporary housing, restricted movement, reassessment pending. Daniel finishes evening count at 9:30 p.m. and lies down on his bunk believing tomorrow will look like today. He does not know that at 3:12 a.m., officers will open his door. Because inside the system, the most important decisions are rarely made in front of the inmate. They are made hours earlier, in rooms he never enters. The walk. At 3:18 a.m., Daniel's footsteps echo differently. The corridor they're walking through is not the main population route. It is narrower. The lighting is dimmer. The air feels still, like a part of the facility rarely used during the day. The officer holding his arm does not grip tightly, but the control is unmistakable. Daniel counts doors as they pass them. 1, 2, 3. He knows this prison well. He's been here long enough to recognize direction. But at the 4th turn, something feels unfamiliar. They are not heading toward segregation. They are not heading toward medical. They are not heading toward the usual disciplinary wing. At 3:20 a.m., they stop at a steel door Daniel has seen only from a distance. It sits beyond a restricted corridor most inmates never enter. No signage, no labels, just reinforced hinges and a control panel mounted beside it. 1 officer keys in a code. A pause. A heavy mechanical unlock echoes from inside the wall. Daniel speaks again, quieter this time. What's this for? Silence. The door opens inward. The space beyond is cleaner, quieter, different. No voices, no movement, no visible inmates. At 3:21 a.m., Daniel is guided forward. The door behind him closes before the next one opens. This is not standard housing. This is not temporary holding. This is controlled movement, layered, deliberate, isolated. Inside the control booth ahead, a single officer watches through reinforced glass. No conversation is exchanged, just a nod. Paperwork is handed over. Daniel notices something small but important. The officers who escorted him do not step fully inside. They release custody at the threshold. Another team takes over. In prison, when staff rotate mid-escort, it means jurisdiction has changed. At 3:23 a.m., his restraints are adjusted, not removed. A new corridor opens. The lighting inside never dims. And for the first time since leaving his cell, Daniel feels something heavier than confusion. He feels separation, not punishment, not confrontation, removal. At 3:24 a.m., the final door opens. A single cell waits at the end of the tier. No noise from neighboring units. No visible inmates. Just a row of identical steel doors under constant light. Daniel steps inside. The door seals behind him. Not loudly, but permanently enough. He does not yet know the name staff use for this place. But inside the facility, it has one. The shadow unit. The first morning, around 6:02 a.m., Daniel realizes the lights never turned off. He isn't sure if he slept. If he did, it was shallow, the kind of sleep where every sound feels amplified. The fluorescent strip above his door hums constantly, casting a pale, unchanging glow across the concrete walls. There is no window facing outside, only a narrow slit of reinforced glass that looks into the tier. Daniel sits up slowly on the steel bunk. The mattress is thinner than the one in population. The blanket folded precisely at the foot of the bed feels institutional, untouched. The cell is cleaner than his previous one, less worn, less marked. No carved initials, no faded pencil scratches, no history. At 6:05 a.m., a metal slot in the door slides open. Stand for count. The voice is neutral. Daniel stands immediately. He notices something different. The count officer does not linger. No small talk. No routine comments. Just a visual check and the slot closes again. At 6:07 a.m., silence returns. In population, mornings come with layered noise. Toilets flushing, men coughing, distant shouting from other tiers, dominoes already tapping before breakfast. Here, there's almost nothing. Daniel walks the length of the cell. 7 steps forward, 7 steps back. He runs his fingers across the wall. Smooth, recently painted. No texture of time. At 6:15 a.m., a tray slides through the slot. Breakfast. No words exchanged. Daniel kneels beside the tray and eats slowly. He listens for signs of others. A cough, a movement, anything. Nothing comes. At 6:27 a.m., he leans toward the door and peers through the narrow glass. He can see another cell across the tier. The door is closed. The light above it is on, but he cannot see inside. He knocks lightly against his own door. No response. In this unit, sound does not travel the way it does in general population. Either the walls are thicker or movement is staggered deliberately. At 6:40 a.m., footsteps approach again. A different officer this time. Younger voice. Ruiz, you're in special housing. Follow instructions. You'll be reviewed. Reviewed. That word lingers. Daniel nods. He wants to ask how long. He doesn't. In prison, questions are often interpreted as resistance. At 6:45 a.m., the officer moves on. Daniel sits back on the bunk. He tries to calculate what triggered this. Yard conversation? Someone else's report? A misunderstanding? He replays the previous day in his head, minute by minute. Nothing stands out. At 7 a.m., the rest of the facility begins to wake. He can faintly hear distant movement somewhere beyond this sealed corridor. But here, inside this unit, the rhythm is different. Slower, more controlled, more observed. Daniel finally understands something subtle but important. This is not disciplinary segregation. No one accused him of breaking a rule. No ticket was written. He was moved preemptively, preventatively. At 7:12 a.m., a camera mounted above his door shifts slightly. He notices it. It is angled downward directly toward his bunk. In population, cameras exist. Here, they feel personal. Daniel eyes back down, staring at the ceiling that never darkens. He has entered a place designed not to react to violence, but to stop it before it starts. And inside that logic, explanation becomes optional. The first assessment. At 9:17 a.m., footsteps stop outside Daniel's cell. Not the heavy rhythm of count, not the casual pace of meal service. This is deliberate. The metal slot slides open. Ruiz, step to the door. Daniel stands immediately. Through the reinforced glass panel, he sees 2 figures, one correctional officer and one staff member in plain institutional attire, holding a tablet. The door does not open. This conversation happens through steel. At 9:18 a.m., the staff member speaks. You've been placed in restricted housing pending review. The tone is procedural, not hostile, not sympathetic. Daniel nods. For how long? He asks carefully. The pause is short. That depends on risk reassessment. Risk. The word lands heavier than punishment. At 9:19 a.m., the tablet screen reflects faintly in the narrow window. The staff member scrolls through Daniel's file. Any current medical issues? No. Any safety concerns? Daniel hesitates for half a second. No. The officer beside the staff member watches closely. Not threatening, observant. At 9:20 a.m., the staff member checks another box on the screen. This is not disciplinary. They clarify. You are here for administrative reasons. Administrative. Another word that explains nothing. Daniel leans slightly closer to the door. Did I do something? The officer responds this time. This is preventative placement. Preventative. It confirms what Daniel suspected during the night escort. He wasn't moved because of something proven. He was moved because of something predicted. At 9:22 a.m., the staff member continues. You'll be reviewed periodically. Comply with all instructions. Keep behavior clear. That helps your reassessment. Helps. Not guarantees. At 9:23 a.m., the slot closes. Footsteps retreat. Daniel remains standing. He replays every interaction from the yard yesterday afternoon. Every word spoken. Every person he stood near. In prison, association can matter as much as action. At 9:30 a.m., he notices something else. Across the tier, a tray slot opens in another cell. A hand reaches out, takes a tray, and retracts. He cannot see the face. Only a wrist and a shadow. There are others here. But contact is structured to prevent connection. At 9:42 a.m., a camera shifts again above his door. Daniel understands now. Every movement inside this unit becomes part of reassessment. How long he stands, how long he sits, whether he paces, whether he knocks. Everything feeds back into the system that decides when he leaves. He sits back down on the bunk. 7 steps forward, 7 steps back, this time slower. Because inside the shadow unit, behavior is no longer just survival. It is evaluation. And at 10 a.m., somewhere inside the administrative wing, Daniel's name sits in a digital queue labeled pending risk stabilization. No timeline attached. The routine begins. At 11:58 a.m., Daniel hears keys again. Not many, just one set. The metal slot opens. Ruiz. Prepare for movement. Movement. The word feels almost hopeful. At 12 p.m., the cell door slides open halfway. Daniel turns around, hands behind his back automatically. He doesn't wait to be told. Compliance has become instinct. Restraints click into place. The officer does not speak much. Just short instructions. Step out. Face forward. Slow. At 12:02 p.m., Daniel is escorted down the short tier. He passes 3 other doors. No faces visible. No voices. Just the hum of lights and the faint buzz of the control booth overhead. This movement is not toward population. It is toward a small enclosed space at the end of the corridor. The shower. At 12:04 p.m., the restraints are removed inside a narrow concrete stall. A button on the wall controls the water. It runs on a timer. 10 minutes, the officer says. The door seals. Daniel stands under the water, counting seconds in his head. He tries to listen beyond the spray, to hear if anyone else is moving at the same time. Nothing. In general population, showers are loud. Arguments echo. Conversations carry. Here, there's only controlled sequence. At 12:12 p.m., the water shuts off automatically. No warning. He dries quickly. The door opens again. Restraints return. At 12:15 p.m., he is escorted back to his cell. No detours. No interaction. This is movement by design, brief, structured, isolated. At 12:17 p.m., his door closes again. The routine is beginning to reveal itself. Short bursts of controlled activity. Long stretches of stillness. Constant visibility. Daniel sits on the bunk and rubs his wrists where the cuffs pressed lightly. Not painfully, but enough to remind him that even routine hygiene requires supervision. At 12:30 p.m., a tray slides through the slot. Lunch. The officer does not linger. Daniel eats slower this time. He is beginning to understand something subtle but powerful. This unit does not rely on force. It relies on pattern. Movement is predictable. Silence is predictable. Observation is constant. At 1:05 p.m., he hears a distant metallic echo, another door opening somewhere down the corridor. The sound is faint, almost swallowed by insulation. He cannot tell who moved, or why. Inside this space, inmates exist parallel to one another, close enough to share walls, but separated enough to remain invisible. At 1:20 p.m., Daniel lies back on his bunk and stares at the ceiling. Time here feels different. In population, the day is divided by noise. Yard call. Count. Meal lines. Here, time stretches between events like empty hallway. He begins counting again. 7 steps forward. 7 steps back. This time slower. Because inside the shadow unit, routine is not comfort. It is control measured in minutes. And at 1:47 p.m., the camera above his door shifts slightly once more. Watching. Always watching. The file reopens. Around 2:43 p.m., Daniel is sitting cross-legged on the lower bunk, staring at the narrow strip of glass in his door. He has started measuring time by routine sounds. Meal slot, footsteps, the distant electronic buzz of doors unlocking somewhere deeper in the unit. But this time, the footsteps stop longer than usual. The metal slot slides open. Ruiz. Step back. He stands immediately. At 2:44 p.m., the cell door does not open. Instead, a portable camera on a pole appears briefly through the window, angling inward. This is not count. This is documentation. Somewhere in the administrative wing, Daniel's file has reopened. Shadow unit placement is never permanent by default, but it is constantly reviewed. Risk must justify restriction, at least on paper. At 2:45 p.m., the staff member from earlier returns, tablet in hand. Any issues since placement? Daniel shakes his head. No. No threats? No concerns? No. The questions are simple. Binary. The answers do not determine release. They contribute to assessment. At 2:47 p.m., the staff member scrolls again. Daniel catches a glimpse of text reflected faintly in the reinforced glass. Association risk, pending stabilization. He doesn't fully understand the phrase, but he understands its weight. Association. In prison, proximity can become evidence. Standing near the wrong table. Speaking to the wrong person. Being seen in the wrong grouping during yard. It does not require action, only pattern. At 2:48 p.m., the officer beside the staff member adds something quietly. Population tensions rising. Unit separation maintained. Daniel hears the words. Separation maintained. Not evaluated for removal. Maintained. At 2:50 p.m., the slot closes. No door movement. No timeline given. Daniel sits back down slowly. He realizes something uncomfortable. He is not here because he broke a rule. He is here because something might happen. Preventative logic has no clock. At 3:02 p.m., he hears movement from another cell. A brief shuffle, then silence. He considers knocking lightly, just once, to confirm someone else is there. He doesn't. Behavior matters here. Any attempt at contact could be logged. And logs become patterns. At 3:17 p.m., Daniel leans back against the wall. He thinks about the yard conversation again. Nothing dramatic was said. Nothing violent. But intelligence inside prison rarely depends on volume. It depends on interpretation. And somewhere inside a digital system, his name remains flagged. Not guilty. Not cleared. Just categorized. In the shadow unit, that is enough. The call that doesn't go through. At 7:58 p.m., the housing unit outside Daniel's cell grows even quieter. Even in isolation, there are patterns to the evening. Meal trays have already passed. Final count is approaching. Movement windows are closing. Daniel sits on the edge of his bunk, staring at the small laminated sheet taped beside the door. A list of restricted housing rules. Phone access, limited. Recreation, scheduled. Visits, subject to review. He has been waiting all day to ask about a call. At 8:01 p.m., footsteps stop outside his cell again. The slot opens. Ruiz. Phone request. Daniel steps closer. Yes. The officer checks a clipboard. Not tonight. Daniel swallows. Why? Pending review. The slot closes before he can respond. At 8:03 p.m., the silence returns heavier than before. In general population, phone calls are currency. They anchor inmates to the outside world. They remind them they still exist beyond concrete walls. In the shadow unit, access is controlled differently. Calls are screened more tightly. Schedules shift. Delays are common. Daniel sits back down slowly. He thinks about his mother. She expects his call every Wednesday evening at 8:15 p.m. He has kept that schedule for months. Routine matters to families as much as inmates. At 8:12 p.m., he looks toward the door again. Nothing. At 8:15 p.m., somewhere outside the facility, a phone rings unanswered. Inside the unit, Daniel presses his hands together and exhales slowly. He is beginning to understand something that staff will never state directly. Shadow placement isolates more than movement. It isolates communication, not as punishment, but as precaution. At 8:22 p.m., He hears faint conversation through the insulated walls. Officers changing shifts in the control booth. One voice mentions overflow pressures and yard instability. The words are quiet, not meant for him, but he hears enough. Population tensions. Preventative separation. Administrative holding. At 8:35 p.m., Daniel lies back on the bunk and stares at the ceiling again. The light above him does not dim. It never dims. In population, night brings at least partial darkness. Here, visibility remains constant. Observation never sleeps. At 8:47 p.m., a camera hum shifts slightly above the door. He notices it again. He wonders how long pending review lasts. Days? Weeks? He has no disciplinary report to count down. No release date posted on paper. Only a digital flag somewhere in a system he cannot see. At 9 p.m., final count is called. Stand for count. Daniel stands. He remains still as the officer confirms his presence through the narrow window. He is accounted for, documented, contained. At 9:07 p.m., the unit settles completely. No more footsteps. No more slots opening. Just fluorescent light and reinforced silence. Daniel closes his eyes, not to sleep, but to imagine the yard, the noise, the movement, the imperfect freedom of general population. He does not yet know how many more nights will look exactly like this one. Inside the shadow unit, time is not measured in days served. It is measured in reassessments not yet completed. Still here, at 5:32 a.m., 14 days after the knock, Daniel wakes before count. He doesn't need noise anymore. His body has adjusted to constant light. He sits up slowly on the lower bunk and looks at the same smooth wall he has stared at every morning for 2 weeks. 14 days. No incident report. No disciplinary hearing. No formal accusation. Just placement. At 5:35 a.m., he walks his now familiar pattern. 7 steps forward. 7 steps back. But he moves slower than he did on the first morning. In population, 2 weeks feels like nothing. In the shadow unit, it feels elongated. Because there are no interruptions. No yard politics. No arguments. No distractions. Just routine. At 5:42 a.m., he presses his ear lightly against the door. He hears something this time. A faint cough from 2 cells down. He has never seen the man. He doesn't know his name. But the cough confirms something important. He is not alone. He is separated. At 5:50 a.m., count is called. Ruiz. Here. The voice that answers back is steady now. Less uncertain than the first night. The officer moves on. At 6:02 a.m., breakfast arrives. The same tray. The same motion. The same silence. Daniel eats without thinking. He has stopped asking how long. Not because he doesn't want to know, but because he understands something now. Release from the shadow unit is not based on days served. It is based on risk stabilization. And risk is not measured by time. It is measured by prediction. At 6:18 a.m., he sits back down and runs his fingers along the edge of the bunk. He thinks about the yard. He heard through muffled hallway conversation yesterday that tension between 2 groups escalated last week. A fight broke out near the weight pile. He was not there. He could not have been, but his name had been near those involved. Association. Prevention. Separation maintained. At 6:30 a.m., somewhere in the administrative wing, his file is reviewed again. A digital note is added. No behavioral issues in restricted housing. That line helps, but does not override the original concern. At 7 a.m., Daniel stares at the ceiling and realizes something unsettling. The system is not waiting for him to do something wrong. It is waiting for the outside situation to calm down. Until then, he remains the variable removed from the equation. At 7:12 a.m., footsteps pause briefly outside his door. He sits up instinctively. The slot opens. Review pending. 2 words. Then it closes. No tone of threat. No sign of urgency. Just administrative continuation. 14 days. And the shadow unit still holds him. Daniel lies back down. The light above him hums steadily. Inside this place, disappearance does not require secrecy. It only requires procedure. The review board. At 10:26 a.m., Daniel is standing at his cell door again. He has learned to respond before the second instruction. The moment footsteps stop outside, he rises. The slot opens. Ruiz. Stand by for review. The word review carries more weight now. At 10:28 a.m., the door opens halfway. Step out. Face forward. Restraints are applied. Smooth, practiced, not rushed. Daniel is escorted only a few feet this time, not down the entire corridor. A small interview space sits adjacent to the tier, separated by thick glass, controlled access. He's positioned inside the room. At 10:30 a.m., the restraints remain on. Across the glass partition, two staff members sit with files open. One is the classification specialist from earlier. The other appears to be a lieutenant. Daniel notices the paperwork first. Not thick stacks, just clipped pages and a tablet. Administrative simplicity. Daniel, the specialist, begins, tone measured. We're conducting your housing reassessment. Daniel nods. He keeps his posture neutral. Since placement, any incidents? No. Any threats against you? No. Any reason you believe you should not return to general population? The question hangs. Daniel hesitates. He knows what they want to hear. If he says yes, that he feels unsafe, placement continues. If he says no, that he feels fine, they may return him. But he also understands something deeper. This review is not about how he feels. It is about how the yard feels without him. At 10:32 a.m., the lieutenant speaks quietly. Population tensions still active. The specialist nods. Stabilization incomplete. Daniel listens carefully. He realizes he is not being evaluated alone. He is part of a larger calculation. At 10:34 a.m., the specialist turns slightly toward the lieutenant. Behavior in restricted housing. Compliant. No flags. That helps, but not enough. At 10:35 a.m., the decision is made. Placement extended. Reassess in 14 days. 14 more days. The words are spoken without emphasis. Daniel feels the shift internally, not shock, not anger. Just wait. He nods again. There is nothing else to do. At 10:36 a.m., he is escorted back to his cell. No delay. No discussion. The door seals behind him once more. At 10:40 a.m., Daniel sits on the bunk and stares at the opposite wall. He now understands the structure fully. The shadow unit does not operate on fixed timelines. It operates on environmental risk. And until the yard quiets, he remains the piece removed. At 11 a.m., somewhere in the facility, population moves toward recreation. Noise rises faintly in the distance. Daniel hears it, but he does not see it. Inside the shadow unit, reassessment does not guarantee release. It guarantees continuation, unless something outside changes. And for now, nothing has. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for the rest documentary.